I've left it open for just for one more day because we had some emails, people with confusions about what they had to do. So you're up until now, you can still submit your assignment for today. So moving along now to guiding the reader, talking about the title, the abstract, the introduction. I don't know if you've noticed, but in this class, I keep kind of zooming in and kind of zooming out. And what I mean by zooming in is looking at specific things, kind of important linguistic things like grammar, and then zooming back out again to keep you focused on the big picture. And so this moment of zooming in today is on these three elements, on the title, the abstract, and the introduction. Even though you shouldn't lose sight of the bigger picture, which is that whole IMRAD structure, or whatever structure is most appropriate in your particular discipline or your field. Because as was shown here the other day, I think it was last week, with Laura, who came up on stage and showed, what can happen in one's head as they sit down to write, which often goes beyond just putting your fingers on the keyboard, is that one place that people do start often is the title. And obviously, you don't want to get stuck on the title, but the title can be important. Often, when we work at CAPA, when we translate articles or we edit articles, the title is the last thing that we actually finalize or polish, because after you've worked on a manuscript, often you make some adjustments in the title. But the title, I think, is an important thing, which is why when I talk to people who are in doctoral programs and master's programs, and I ask them, so what is the title of your thesis? And I'm not talking about people who have just started. I'm talking about people who have been, in the program for a couple of years, and they tell me, well, I don't have a title yet. I keep thinking, I often think, wow, that's strange for me. It's kind of like, for me, it's kind of like somebody who's, 8-9 months pregnant and they haven't thought of the name yet. When my wife and I were having our first child, that was one of the first things we talked about. It was like, okay, if it's a girl, we want to call her Liz. If it's a boy, we want to call him, Benjamin or whatever. We had different options for names. And then all of a sudden, when we find out the gender of that baby, when we find out it's going to be a boy or girl, then that little fetus becomes a human being. You start imagining yourself, hey, Benjamin, time for dinner. You start visualizing things with your children. It becomes more than a little person inside someone. It's this whole future that you imagine. And so when someone says, I don't have a title yet for my thesis or dissertation, I think, well, that it's kind of good to have a title to kind of motivate you to where is your work going? Where is your research ultimately taking you in terms of what angle are you taking, at least? And that can change. Obviously, the title can change many times, but today we're going to think about, what does a title mean? How can it help you in your IMRAD, in your article that you're writing? And that connects to the abstract, and it connects to the introduction as well, as we'll see today in today's class. This, of course, is leading up to you turning in your introduction. You're going to write an introduction, which will be due next month in October. And we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. So we're going to review some key concepts from last week today, explore the importance of titles and the structure of abstracts. And we're going to talk about the notion of what we call claims and evidence. And this has to do with argumentation in academic writing. And then finally, we'll look at developing your writing section, your introduction section. If you recall, I talked about this kind of structure that is really common in academic discourse, this notion of they say and I say. And this can permeate all kinds of academic discourse in the introduction section, in the discussion section, and not just in written discourse, but oral academic discourse as well. But the important thing is, as Graff and Birkenstein point out, is that you are indicating as an author or as an academic speaker what conversation you're entering. What is the greater dialogue, the greater context that you are contributing to. So I'd like to show you a couple of examples I thought were good ones. This is anonymized, as it were, give a pseudonym. This one from Josephine, who submitted this. Epilepsy affects cognition, and many studies show that one of its most affected functions is memory. However, little is said about the executive functions, which are essential for carrying out activities of daily living and problem solving. The present study aims to describe executive functions in adults with refractory epilepsy, comprehending the components of inhibitory control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. Now, if I were working on this as an editor, and I might polish a few things here, but I would say that the general structure is actually quite good because she already starts with the conversation. Epilepsy affects cognition, and many studies show that one of its most affected functions is memory. So it situates the study. She situates the study, shows that it's an important subject, but it's one that is known already. This is the conversation the person is responding to. And then points out where the specific gap is in the literature or in that particular field. However, little is said about the executive functions, which are essential for carrying out activities. So there's a clear intention to provide a move to, marked, as is commonly the case, by the word however. And this word however is very powerful in that sense because it is a clear signal that, okay, the author is marking the gap, marking the move to. So that's the first one, move one, and move two clearly signaled in this very short abstract. Here's another example, this one from Karen, who writes, heparin is the main anticoagulant agent used to treat thrombosis or to prevent abdominal clot formation. However, it has adverse effects in patients. For this reason, many studies seek alternatives to this medicine. Among them, the study of sulfated polysaccharides has gained notoriety in the literature, especially the use of citrus pectin. However, up to now, there are no reports in the literature on the structural modification of citrus pectin and its sulfation optimization with SO3 pyridine and its implications in anticoagulant activity, which may lead to the improvement of its sulfation process and the enhancement of its bioactivity. Again, I might polish this a little bit in terms of maybe a couple of linguistic points, but the general structure is clearly there, where you have this whole section there is basically a move one, talking about the conversation. You can have a look at that for a second. The idea, just to recall, is that when the writer situates the research, often you can visualize a kind of crowded train car, that there are already a bunch of people that have talked about this particular subject in your field, but then you want your voice heard, and you're making a space. That's the creating of a research space. And when you do that, since you're creating a research space, you also have people who will wonder, okay, this is new, but why is it special? Why is this necessary? And that's when the naysayer can pop up. So in this one here, where Josephine talks about little is said about the executive functions, Josephine says, well, you know, the naysayer might question the instruments we use for the neuropsychological evaluation. As this research is self-funded, we had to choose from instruments that were free of charge, accessible through the literature. However, one may say that other instruments were better suited for our purpose. Many people pointed this out, Many people pointed this out that, you know, since we are working within a context of public university, sometimes we don't have all of the resources that we would like to have. There's something wrong with that monitor. It's not working. Oh, okay, yeah. Huh? Just in technical difficulties. And that is true. I mean, obviously, in a public university system like the Federal, as you know, but no mystery here, everybody knows that we have some funding constraints, and that can therefore lead to some limitations in terms of pure equipment that we use. That is a common point that was brought up by people saying this is something that the naysayer might bring up. However, the naysayer can question much more than that. So let's look at a few examples here. Number one, there has been no research on this topic so far in the literature. Number two, the importance of the subject has already been well established. And number three, the results of this research conclusively prove that the participants improved. So can you hear in the first one, a naysayer come up? He will pop up maybe when he reads a sentence like, there has been no research on this topic so far in the literature. It's almost like a provocation. When I read this in a manuscript, when I review manuscripts, and somebody writes something like this, there has been no research on the topic so far in the literature, it's almost as if somebody's throwing down a gauntlet for me to pick up. It's almost as if somebody's saying, I challenge you to find research on this in the literature. And I think to that extent, it's unnecessary to provoke the naysayer in that way, to say that there is no research. But there are ways that you can soften that. The same thing with number two. The importance of the subject has already been well established. Okay, that's probably true, but you need to, if you make that claim, you need to provide evidence for it. And the third one, the results of this research conclusively prove that the participants improved. If you recall last week, I showed you that in non-native manuscripts, the word prove is much more common than in native speaker manuscripts where they use other words. And I think there may be a reason for that, is that again, this kind of word, conclusively prove, could unnecessarily provoke a naysayer. So here, with the first example, where there has been no research on this topic so far in the literature, is what the author wrote, this imaginary author. That for me would show no awareness of, or little awareness of, the naysayer. However, something like this would show me that there is some awareness of the naysayer. Something like this, where you're qualifying this claim. You're making a claim, but you're qualifying it and say, okay, to the best of our knowledge, there is little or no research on this topic. So whereas the first one, you can see that the naysayer might immediately say, oh really? Is that really true? I happen to know that, and they would probably go to Google Scholar and try to prove you wrong. Whereas the second one, to the best of our knowledge, there is little or no research. That one there kind of disarms the naysayer and says, okay, yeah, the writer may be right. In fact, I sympathize with this author's point of view because I think there is very little research on there. And the person is qualifying the statement, saying to the best of her or his knowledge, there is little or perhaps even no research, but it qualifies it. This sentence here is hedged. This is called hedging, where you make a claim and you soften that claim. And that hedging there, and we're going to talk more about hedging when we get to the discussion section of the article, that can be very effective to reduce the appearance of a naysayer, or at least soften his objection to your work. The second example, the importance has already been well established. Well, simply, you can't just say that without showing that it has. And the very simple way of doing that is just simply adding some references. And this person here has, 9 or 10 references there, 9 references that show that yes, okay, lots of people have talked about it, it's well established. Don't even look at the reference section because you know I'm right. And then the third one, the results of this research conclusively prove, which is, I don't think, most people here wouldn't write that, it's an exaggeration, but I've seen things similar to this. Conclusively prove that the participants improved. Awareness of the naysayer would say something more like this. The results of this research provide compelling evidence that participants improved. So you're saying that the evidence is strong, but you're not saying it's a conclusive proof of improvement. You're trying to make a strong claim without making an exaggerated claim. And a sentence like this is something that would appear in the discussion section. As I said, we'll talk about the discussion section later on in this course. So awareness of the naysayer, it goes beyond just saying, oh, our equipment is claims that are made throughout a manuscript, especially in the introduction section and the discussion section. Okay, so in this article, which you had a look at for your homework, you didn't have a look at the whole article, but just the introduction section. This is an article about how, to what extent is it the case that non-native speakers have more difficulty than native speakers when trying to write a manuscript in English. And as you saw, there are 3 moves in the introduction, with the first move being all this green part here. And then there's a second, however, which marks the second move. Now notice the way they do this. They mark it with however, and then it is an open question. To what degree writing science in English as a second language is more difficult to writing science as a first language? We're going to look at today how the authors carefully choose their words to avoid a naysay. In this case, you can almost hear the author being aware that there's a naysayer by phrasing the move to in this way, saying, however, the authors could say, however, there is no research on this area, or the author could say, however, there is still this to be studied. But the authors choose to say it is an open question to what degree writing science in English. And this phrasing here has been carefully crafted. And so we're going to look a little bit today about how you can use this careful formulation of words to make sure that you mark your moves in a way that the reader can understand, okay, the author is pointing out a research gap, and also to do so in a way that doesn't unnecessarily provoke the naysayer. Because he can often appear right here as you try to create a research space. Now, this creation of a research space happens in the abstract, as well as often appears in abstracts in the form of IMRAD, so the introduction, methods, research, and discussion. If you look at 100 abstracts, maybe only 70 of them have IMRAD in them, but I like to have IMRAD in them. I like to have an abstract that marks or shows where a kind of introduction, method, results, and discussion in the abstract. Here, this is the abstract from that article that I just referred to about the Mexican scientists and non-native speakers in additional burden writing in English. Can you see here, can you identify, for example, can you identify a method section? It's right here, right? Here they talk about the participants and the procedure. Therefore, if you go back, you can also see that before this is a kind of introduction section, which has a kind of research space that has been inserted in it. So this structure here is signaled already in the abstract, where basically all of this is the introduction, and here is cars. Previous qualitative research has shown that scientists writing English in a second language face difficulties. That's the conversation. That's the territory. And then move 2, but has not established parameters. And that's the gap. So this is move 1 here, previous qualitative research, and move 2 right here. There's the introduction, then that's followed by the method, and then you see the results right here, clearly marked by the word results. The results revealed that The experience of writing a scientific research article in English is significantly different. Okay. And then a kind of discussion section which shows the implications of this research. The findings suggest that the use of English as a second language is the cause of this increased burden. So here you have a nice little encapsulation with IMRAD and CARS already in the abstract. I see this as important. I see this as important because if somebody receives an abstract, they can already get an idea of where you're going as an author. That's nice, because if a reviewer or an editor can see already where you're going as an author in your abstract, that means that they're less likely to have the question as they're reading of, what's the point here? Where's the author going? It's kind of as if you look at a map before you go on a journey. That's what we used to do before we had GPS, right, on our cars, or you have a map in the car. But often you'd say, okay, I got to go to this place over here that I've never been before. And so you'd look at the map and say, okay, this is how I got to go down this street, then turn right, then turn left. Okay. And so this here is a kind of map, can be a kind of map for the person before they embark on this journey of reading your article. Okay, this is where the author is taking me, and I'll look out for these things that are interesting already in the abstract. Also, this is important because your abstract is what potential reviewers see. So when a journal, when you submit your article to a journal, most often these days, the editor will not send the full article first. They'll send the abstract for the potential reviewer to look at. So if you want your article to be reviewed, it's often important to have a good abstract there so that the reviewer sees it and says, okay, I see the abstract, yes, that looks interesting, I'll accept it. It also helps in answering this question here. Remember, this is what I see as a reviewer when I review manuscripts, that the new and significant information that justifies publication is already there, and the problem is significantly stated already in the abstract. So just to recap, this CARS framework is that the first move is where you establish territory, mentioning the importance of the research, where the conversation is. Number two, establishing your niche, mentioning the gap, what's still needed to address in that territory or that conversation. And move three is occupying that niche, saying how that gap will be or was filled. That's a general CARS framework. And so here, you have this kind of fake example of people not getting enough sleep. So imagine this abstract here. There is a growing concern that people are not getting enough sleep. Moreover, there is increasing evidence of an association between sleep and adult health. However, there is little research on how much sleep older adults over 65 need. This retrospective cohort study examined reported sleep duration and possible associations with health concerns. Results show that older adults generally require less sleep than younger adults. Here you have a move 1. Here, a clearly marked move 2. And the rest being move 3. Again, not all abstracts have this, but this is something that is good to have or to think about already in the abstract section. But if you recall, Eliana Irano's article, and she points out that in Brazilian articles that she analyzed, Brazilians tend to not include a move 2. What that looks like is that instead of this, what a lot of articles, abstracts look like, when you don't have a move 2, as was shown by her research, is that the author doesn't mark a gap, and instead you get something that looks like this. There's a growing concern that people are not getting enough sleep. Moreover, there is increasing evidence of an association between sleep and adult health. This retrospective cohort study examined reported sleep duration among elderly and possible association with health concerns. In other words, here the person has talked about a problem, but not what the gap is. And that is a very common kind of structure that I see in manuscripts. Worse, and this is also common, is when there's no move 1, just a move 3, which is what we saw in one of the abstracts last week. And that looks like this. This retrospective cohort study examined reported sleep duration among the elderly and possible associations with health concerns. Results show that older adults generally require less sleep than younger adults. The author, the person who reads this, doesn't know who you're responding to, why this research is even necessary. And that is a common structure that I see. This is like when my father, when he used to be a vacuum cleaner salesperson, this would be like saying, okay, this vacuum cleaner is sure to vacuum up all your dirt without showing that the dirt is there first, without showing how much of a serious problem you have in your carpets, or as my dad would often do, even in the bed sheets. All right, so zooming out again to this IMRAD structure of your article, I would also argue that, in fact, part of the IMRAD structure, the way you conceptualize it, should be also with the title. I see these things as all being connected. Title, even abstract, introduction. Why? Because a good title can already signal to the reader, okay, where is this author going? What is this really about? Why is this going to be interesting? Why is this going to be something new or unusual or important? This reminds me of, there's this museum in San Francisco that, it's not really a museum, it's a kind of play, it's a kind of play park, indoor play park that was created for children back in 1998. They wanted it to be a kind of children's museum that would feature art and other kinds of things that children would create inside this building, and the artwork would be displayed inside this building. And so instead of a museum like our usual concept of museum in which artists bring in work from outside and the museum displays these works of art, this children's museum would be one in which children would create the artwork inside it, and then that artwork would be displayed. And so the art would be created from the children that enter this building here. And they like this. I like it. It's a nice concept, but they want to have an interesting, unusual name. And so instead of calling it Children's Museum, which they thought would sound boring, they played with the name and they called it Zeum. But there was a problem. They weren't getting anybody to come in. Nobody was visiting Zeum because they just honestly didn't know what it was about. And it's actually a really cool place. I've taken my son there. Really, really nice place. So they decided in 2011 to change the name, make it more transparent, and this is the name that it is currently. Children's Creativity Museum. Seems like a logical decision to do that. And the company acknowledged this in the press release. They say, although the name museum sounded fun, it didn't provide parents with any clues about what they and their children would experience. And so when you're planning your article, your articles in the future, you might want to think about this concept, providing clues about what the reader will experience in the article. So we're going to talk about that now. What makes a good title? And there's no yes or no answer for this. It's something that you will develop together with your advisor, if you have one. I mean, we have people here who are watching right now who are advisors themselves. Okay, so here's an abstract, and this is an abstract that's based on a real study about alcohol consumption and language fluency. Because you've probably heard this before. I've heard people say this, that my English is not so good, but if I've had a couple of caipirinhas, then my English, suddenly becomes super native or whatever it may be. Yeah. And so you have this kind of notion. Some people say this: oh, if I drink, I'm more fluent. And some people in the Netherlands decided to put this to the test. And they said, and this is the abstract: there is a popular belief that alcohol consumption can help someone speak a foreign language more fluently. However, there is no evidence in the current literature to support this idea. Probably because it's hard to get ethical approval for something like this. This study aimed to investigate the effect of drinking alcoholic beverages on how adult learners of English perceive themselves, self-ratings, and how they are perceived by others, peer ratings. Because it's kind of like dancing, right? When there are people who say, I dance better if I drink, but that's your self-rating. If you see a video of yourself afterwards the next day, you think, okay, no, I wasn't as good as I thought I was. Results show that consuming alcohol drinks positively affected perceptions of fluency. Okay, so my question for you is, which title do you think would be best for this article? Here are 4 options. Option A, can drinking alcohol make you speak foreign language more fluently? Evidence from a quasi-experimental study. B, ethyl alcohol consumption by human adults in distilled form. Effects on neuromuscular verbal articulation in a foreign language. C, drinking alcohol positively affects fluency in a foreign language. Or D, the effects of consuming alcoholic beverages on foreign language fluency. All right, I'm going to let you choose, and we're going to do a Kahoot so we can involve not only people here in the auditorium, but people who are watching on their computers. So I'm going to need to access the. Is it this machine here? This one here, okay. Yes, thank you. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the website that you need to go to, www.kahoot.it. And then you will enter this game pin 886274. And then we'll resume after people join. It's okay. Yeah. Love drinks. Nancy Drew. I don't think. Baboon. Batman. Sirius Black. Bloody Mary. Lula. Baby Shark. Paçoca, my favorite Brazilian sweet. Okay, so let's get started. Okay. So it looks like most people preferred the last one. The effects of consuming alcoholic beverages on foreign language fluency. Oh, sorry. And the least preferred one was the highly technical one. Okay. Well, let's look at what the research says about titles, and look at some titles, different types of titles. And as I said, there's no right or wrong answer here, but it depends on the effect that you want to give. And every study will have a title that's maybe more adequate depending on the effect that you want to cause on your reader or potential reader. So we're going to look at 8 different types of titles today, and these are 8 different types, but sometimes you have mixed ones. So we'll start with just a plain transparent title, what I call a transparent title. Number 2, the title that highlights a finding, a research result. Number 3, one that highlights the implication or application of your research. Number 4, one that I call more method focused. Number 5, one that poses a question. Number 6, one that focuses on the effect of a particular intervention. Number 7, elaboration, in other words, explaining a little bit of options when you're choosing a toolbox and try to choose, or maybe a palette of colors and choose how you want to paint your title. So we'll start with the very first one, the transparent title. An example from Portuguese first. So this would be what I call a transparent title. A importância de andar com guarda-chuva em Curitiba. Very appropriate for today. Nothing secretive about that. It's clear that you just have a kind of clear, transparent title. In the real world, this is an example. Costs of hospital malnutrition. Just a simple, transparent title saying this is what the article is about. Just this. Again, I'm not saying this is good or bad, but there are articles that you think, okay, this is the best option. And for these authors, Curtis and authors, decided that this title was best for that particular article. Just say this article is about costs of hospital malnutrition. That's all we want to say. I'll show you examples from my own research. This one here, a phrasal expressions list, was chosen by me and my co-author as the most appropriate title for a number of reasons. One, because we knew that we were entering a conversation about lists of phrases and lists of words in the research in applied linguistics. So there had been other previous studies discussing the importance of word lists, and in this case we were talking about an expressions list of lexical items that could be used in various kinds of research and contexts. And since, one, we knew that we wanted to enter this conversation about lists, and two, we wanted to make it clear that we were doing something a little different, where we're talking about phraseology, phrasal lists, we decided, okay, this is, because we want to enter this conversation about lists, and because we want to focus on phrases, this is what makes sense for us. Just a simple, transparent title, a phrasal expressions list. And it did well. Here is another type of title, one that focuses on finding. So returning to the notion of umbrellas. Which seems to be the truth, right? So that would be, in this case, the author's deciding we want to focus on the important result from this study. And you can see this is a common title type you see in research. 1-MCP does not improve the shelf life of Chinese cabbage. So perhaps they are entering a conversation where other researchers had used MCP to improve shelf life, but they found something different. They wanted to show, this is the conversation we're entering, and we're saying this does not improve shelf life of Chinese cabbage. And so we want to highlight this finding, this fact from our research. Another example, exposure to tourism reduces stress-induced corticosterone levels in Galapagos marine iguanas. That's a very interesting finding. They wanted to highlight that. I often, when I look at a title like this, I think, how did they do that? You know, I imagine like these iguanas. Were they interviewed? Another type of title, one that focuses on the implication or application of the research. So here's another example. Again, going back to the umbrella thing. So this is showing a kind of how-to. Their research purports to show one way of reducing the chances of forgetting an umbrella. You see this in a real-world example here. Improving the chemical dealloying of amorphous alloys. So their research showed how they did this. That they're focusing on the process and the application of this process. Another title type, one that focuses on the method. Again, there could be many reasons for doing so. This one here, simulating sulfuric acid dew point corrosion of enamels with the different contents of silica. Physical activity in relation to urban environments in 14 cities worldwide, a cross-sectional study. And the authors, again, they may choose for some reason to include this information about the method, in this case a cross-sectional study, because they want to highlight that this research, this study, its strong point perhaps is that they did something that was cross-sectional as opposed to longitudinal or whatever has been done before. For some reason, they want to highlight that this was something important about this study. Another example, social media competitive analysis and text mining, a case study in the pizza industry. So they're highlighting that this is a case study. That can be a good thing if you think that the reviewer or the person reading this is saying, okay, this is not a huge sample. We're looking at one particular perhaps in-depth study. Another title type, one that raises a question, getting back to the umbrella. This is an interesting way of provoking the reader to, it implicitly says this question is worth answering. This question maybe it draws the attention of the reader. Say, okay, does it do this? I want to know the answer. And this is a common title type. So here's one. Is doing your homework associated with becoming more conscientious? A bit long, but for some reason they chose this particular title and they had some success with it because it was published. A title type that focuses on the effect. So here's an example. Effects of inulin type fructans this word's too long for me, and related symbiotics on inflammatory markers in adult patients with overweight or obesity, a systematic review. So here you see they focus on the effect, and they also include something about the method. I also have an article with to include this effect of frequency and idiomaticity on second language reading comprehension, because we wanted to show that that was the highlight is an effect of these two things on reading comprehension in a foreign language. What I call elaboration, it's another title type. This is an expression in Portuguese that I still don't quite understand what it means. So I put it in a title. But you can see that this is also a common way of putting a title, is elaborating on a question, elaborating on a point that you raise, such as this one: who receives oral nutritional supplements in nursing homes? Question, then the answer, results from the Nutritional Day Project. So they talk about, this is the question they had, and then what they have to say about it. I have an article like this, listening for needles in haystacks, how lecturers introduce key terms. I wanted to highlight this idea that during university lectures, sometimes the lecturer is trying to make a point, but that point gets lost in a lot of other words and points that are made. So I call these points that the lecturer wants to make kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack. And this, for me, was a good way of, a good metaphor for the way lecturers sometimes don't make their point very clearly. So I wanted this to be the first point of the article's title, and then an explanation, elaboration on what that means. Articles that use a quote. Sometimes these are real quotes from participants in a study. Sometimes they're quotes that kind of reflect the nature of what people think, but they can call attention. Here's an example. That's not my job, developing flexible employee work orientations. So maybe this is something that a participant said in that study, or a kind of notion, a kind of encapsulation of what a lot of people in that cohort said about when they were interviewed, for example. And then there's an elaboration on it. I can't lie to your face. Minimal face-to-face interaction promotes honesty. I have one, as you saw, my own take on this. I don't know if I would do the same title again, to be honest, but that was my choice at the time. And then you have kind of mixed hybrid ones. I mentioned there's not like one or the other. You have this one here: neurodevelopmental disorders are highly overrepresented in children with obesity. Elaboration, a cross-sectional study, but it's also focusing on method. So you have one that focuses on, the first part of this title focuses on a finding, and then elaboration that includes a method. So getting back to the abstract here that you all read, and you chose a title, the real title was this one here. This is the actual title of that paper. Dutch Courage? Question. Effects of acute alcohol consumption on self-ratings and observer ratings of foreign language skills. So they're highlighting here effect, and they kind of ask a question to begin. This is it's an interesting title, but the only thing is it presupposes that you know what Dutch Courage is. So I would say that maybe it's not the best title, although of course it was successful because it was published. Perhaps without this first part, maybe it would be even more successful. This is just my own conjecture, because it obscures perhaps a little bit about what it is about, and even throws the reader off a little bit about what it might be. Because the reason they chose this particular construction is that Dutch courage means when you have more confidence because you drink a lot. This is an expression that is used especially in Britain, not so much in the United States, but a lot of people in the United States know what it means. It's also an expression that's kind of dying out, in my opinion. You don't hear a lot of young people using this anymore, about Dutch courage. And they also chose this because it was done in the context of the Netherlands. People speaking Dutch, I think it was, a study. And so they thought it was clever, it was creative, and it is creative and it's clever, but maybe not as effective as it could be. It could throw readers off. Oh my goodness. All right. And a word of advice, don't make your title too long. There's research that has been published that shows that titles that are too long get cited less. Shorter titles tend to get cited more. There's a correlation. Seems you can draw a correlation between anything if you have enough data, but it's true that that titles that are too long tend to get cited less. What they say here is shorter titles receive more citations per paper. These results are consistent with the intriguing hypothesis that papers with shorter titles may be easier to understand and hence attract more citations. Well, it's kind of clear. If you can understand the title, that's a good start. If you can't understand the title, or if it's confusing, that's not a good start. Here's right now a real title. And all of this is a title. It's about the same size as a Shakespearean sonnet, and I don't know if the reader would already get exhausted by the time they get to here. It's kind of daunting, this title. There are almost as many authors as there are words in this title, so which is why, you know, you have Star Wars is a good title for a movie. People know Star Wars. Can you imagine if it had been titled The Story of a Young Man Who Became a Jedi to Fight an Evil Empire, but then learns that the leader of the empire is actually his dad? Would not have the same impact as this here. How do you choose a title? Well, just like I said last week, you can start, or a week before that, you can start thinking about, okay, what are the results? What are the results that I want to highlight? What does my study really show? And I can put that over here, as I've shown before in the introduction, that can guide your introduction, but it can also guide your title. And you can spend a long time thinking about your title. Probably now, and then before you submit your article, there'll be many times that you even revise your title. Just like with the introduction, thinking about it, typing it, changing it, going to the bathroom, having coffee, coming back again, going to the bathroom again, washing dishes, and coming back and thinking about your title some more. And that can be something that you do throughout your writing. In this article that you saw a little bit of, where they choose this title here, Quantifying the Burden of Writing Research Articles in a Second Language Data from Mexican Scientists, here you can see that they focus on an elaboration here, and then the process or the implication, the application of the research. You can also say that this is also making a claim. So they're saying implicitly that there is a burden when writing research articles, and especially in a second language. That's their claim. The authors are saying already their I say. This is kind of this is not the they say, but the I say in this title. They're making their claim, their assertion. They're claiming something here implicitly. And then the elaboration of this after the colon is focusing on the evidence of that claim. So they're already highlighting for the reader, I'm making this claim, we are making this claim, and here is the evidence that we will provide for this claim. This notion of claiming, making claims, and providing evidence for those claims is something that is a micro and macro recipe for building an argument. So this is also related to the naysayer, because if you read here just quantifying the burden of research articles, already the naysayer is going to say, okay, what data do you have? And the authors say, okay, we have data from Mexican scientists. And they're only from Mexican scientists. We're not saying the whole world. Because a claim can raise the specter of the naysayer. Like the first time I saw this. When I saw this, I immediately became a naysayer, and I thought, I've had some really good hamburgers in my life. I can think of 10 places right now in my hometown that they are pretty good competition. So I'd like to know, what was their method for arriving at this result? They're making a pretty strong claim here of being the best burger in the world. And my apologies if you're involved in this restaurant. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that it's a pretty strong claim, and I'd want to see the evidence. What's the evidence for this? What evidence do you have for this claim? Our president, my president, Donald Trump, he's really big on making these claims in a tweet almost every other day. One famous one, you may have heard this, when he said that his telephones had been wiretapped by the Obama administration. He made this claim in a tweet. How low President Obama has gone to tap my phones during the very sacred election process. This is Nixon, Watergate, bad or sick guy. And so what happened was he provoked naysayers with this, and people wanted to know, where's your evidence? And he had some difficulty. And then they just let it die, basically, because there was no evidence for this. They tried to find it, but he made this claim, and there was no evidence for it, really. And so when you're building an argument, you have to think of, okay, you're going to make lots of claims. You got to think, what's my evidence? You have to put that evidence out there, because if not, then you can raise the specter of the naysayer. That's a kind of recipe for building an argument. And so you can start with your results and think in the title, how can I already foreground what my evidence is and how I will make that claim. And you'll be doing that throughout your article, especially in the discussion section as well, where you're going to talk about the claims that you make, what your research results say, and what evidence you have to make those claims. When you look deeply into an article's structure, you can find micro examples of how people do that. Even grammatical structure can help you make that point. So if you look at the grammar used in each move 1, move 2, move 3 that an author makes, one thing you can do is whenever you do that in your own articles that you read for your dissertations and your theses, pay attention to the words that are used. Pay attention to the grammar that is used and the vocabulary that is used by the authors, and plagiarize. I don't mean take their ideas and use them. I mean, look at the words they use and use them. Note them down and copy them. So in this article here, they start like this. They say, the world of scientific publication is dominated by the English language. And then they make that claim here, and then they provide evidence for that claim by the authors. Good. Research over the last 3 decades has shown a continual increase in the percentage of scientific publications in English from 66% in 1980s, claim, evidence, to 89% or 90% at the end of the 20th century, claim and evidence. The situation is such that Hamill has made the claim that there is a rapid trend toward English monoculturalism in scientific publication. All right, so that's all of move 1. That's the territory, the they say. And actually, this is still they say. However, while the vast, well, actually, it's also I say. However, while the vast majority of scientific publication might be in English, the scientists producing knowledge who desire to disseminate their findings are not necessarily first language speakers, and they go on to support that claim as well. So here you have a claim, evidence, claim, and more evidence. But if you look at the grammar that's used, you have the first claim being just what's called a present simple, the simple present in English, the verb to be, or as I've heard some Brazilians say, the verb to be. The world of scientific publication is dominated by as you probably learned in one of the very first English language classes you ever had, if you're not a native speaker of English, is that the present simple is used often to talk about things that happen always or that are facts. It rains in Curitiba often. Fact. The world of scientific publication is dominated by the English language. Fact. Or that's the claim that they want to make. But then they want to show the territory that they say. So they signal that and they say, research over the last 3 decades has shown. They don't say showed, because that would be distancing the claim from the past. No, they're saying this is the territory that is still relevant to today. So present perfect has shown. And they continue that, making that claim, showing the territory and its relevance to the present argument being made by showing the present perfect again, has made. But then they bring it back to what they want to make as a fact. They say this is the situation now. So you have claim, evidence, and claim. So my recommendation is when you look at this, when you look at your own research articles, pay attention to this, how the author makes claims, how the author presents evidence for the claims, and this will happen ubiquitously in argumentation that authors make. And copy it. I do this. For example, last year I think it was, or the year before that, I was reading a dissertation in Portuguese, and I saw the author use this phrase here, esta pesquisa empenha-se em aferir, and I didn't know what that meant. And so I had to look it up. And I said, wow, that sounds pretty fancy. I'm going to write this down and use it one day. Not in casual conversation, because then I would look pretty ridiculous, but in argumentation. So this might make me sound pretty good, maybe. I don't know. I haven't used it yet, but I wrote it down. Same thing with this one. Principalmente ao que cerne. I understand what this means. I've never used this before. Ao que cerne. I'm going to use this. This phrase sounds really good, and I copied it down. So you can do the same thing with English in the articles you read, like here. I would say, here's a good example of a phrase you could write down in your little data bank of phrases that you might use someday in the future. Like, research over the last 3 decades has shown a continual increase. You could simply modify a few things here. Research over the last 2 years, 3 months, 10, 20 centuries, whatever you want to say. Research over the last blah, blah, blah has shown and then you could say decline or increase or whatever. But this is a nice little basic phraseology here, formulation, to signal that you're talking about the they say, that you're signaling the territory, the conversation that you're entering. The same thing here, another good example. Hamill has made the claim that when you get confused about what you should say, when you want to talk about other research, when you get tired of writing the same thing like so-and-so affirms, so-and-so says, what other words I have? Oh yeah, I've written these ones down here. Hamill has made the claim that sounds good. I would copy that. Hamill has made the claim that there is a rapid trend toward a trend toward, or a slow trend toward. You could substitute this adjective or even take it out, and you have a ready-made, nice little academic formula here to use in your writing. You're not plagiarizing. You're using phrases that lots of authors use. They're out there. It's public domain. It's the English language. You could take that and use it in your own writing, adapt it. You're not taking other people's ideas, you're taking some words that are useful to use in your argumentation. So here, as I pointed out, you see this in that article. It is an open question. It's a nice way of saying, I am opening a move to here. That's one example of hundreds that you could use. But it's not helpful for me to say hundreds. Find a few that you can use for your own writing. I like this in other words. They're elaborating, they're explaining more about that move. Furthermore, and you can see, oh, this is a nice structure for a move to. Here's another nice phrase. The aim of this article is to provide, may seem obvious, but it's one that you can have in your own data bank of phrases. And you see this in a lot of places. So here's an article from genetics, and you see that there's this one, in this particular journal, they have this section here in brief. Every journal has, lots of journals have their own specificities about the sections that they want. But they have this section here to make sure that the reader understands basically what is this article about. And the authors, in their summary, they signal using key expressions like this. Here's move one. Humans differ in the outcome that follows exposure to life-threatening pathogens. And then the move two. They create that research space with the word yet. And maybe a lot of people here haven't thought about the word yet as a kind of word that means basically the same thing as however. Maybe you know the word yet as, have you seen the new Star Wars movie yet? But in this case, it's signaling a move to, and very effectively so. Yet the extent of population differences in immune responses and their genetic evolutionary determinants remain undefined. Perfect. Very well signaled. And in this particular field, in this particular discipline and this journal, they want to have some explanation about, they want to include explanation about their methods, and so they simply signal what they did with the word here. Here, we characterized, referring to this article. Simple word. And then finally, the move three. Every discipline will have its own nuances and particular demands for what should be included in the abstract. So, for example, the International Journal of Information Management, they always include in the introduction section or in the abstract section sometimes a kind of roadmap of what is in this journal, what is to come. Section 2 is a brief review of text mining. Section 3 explains the result. Section 4 discusses the findings. Section 5 discusses, and they expect this in the journal. The readers of this particular journal in this particular discipline of information management, they expect to see this roadmap early on before they move to the method section. And so my advice is that, what I can do here as a teacher of academic writing has its limits. I can give you some tips about how to generally structure your arguments, but when you get down to how you should organize much of the content, you should always defer to your particular field. And that's why I recommend that you and your advisors choose good texts, what I call mentor texts, or what are called mentor texts. A mentor text is simply an article that you say, this is well written, it's an important article in my field, and I can use this text to help me refer to what sections I should include in my articles or the way arguments are made, and I suggest having more than one. Have a few mentor texts that you refer to. Again, you're not plagiarizing, you're simply looking at other articles to help you adapt as you construct your own voice as an academic author. So when you look at your IMRAD section and you build your title, you have to refer to the journal that you will likely publish in. What are the best titles? What are the ways that authors use to construct their arguments? Now, you're going to have to use your results soon to start thinking about the title and your introduction, because you have to write an introduction for this class. But a lot of people at this stage begin to panic because they say, oh no, I don't have any data. Or I don't have enough data. So if you don't have data collected yet, which is the case for some 30% of you, first try to get some. Of course, you can't go on eBay to buy data, but you can, first of all, think that the article that you will write for this class, you hopefully will be able to use it as a blueprint or a template for future articles that you write. So even if you don't use the article that you write for this class to submit to a journal, which actually often has happened, where we have a pretty good success rate of people who write articles that begin in this class and then get published, at the very least, you'll be developing a piece of work that later on you can refer to when you do write your real article to submit to a journal. And you say, okay, let's see, I'm writing a real article 2 years from now. I'm writing a real article that I'm going to submit to a journal. Let me see what I did in Ron's class a couple of years ago. Oh yeah, I did this, and that. Yeah, I should try to adapt that for this article. So think of it that you're creating your own, possibly your own blueprint or your own template for future use. So if that's the case, even if you use partial data right now, that can help you. So if you have some data collected, that can help you with that template that you're going to build, that you're going to use. If you don't have any data at all, even if you don't even have partial data, then another option that you can try is using that data that haven't been used yet. So there are people who have finished their master's and thesis, your doctoral thesis, and they have data sets that they never used. They could pass on to you and say, well, you can try using these if you like. Often you have advisors and other professors who have data that they want to use, they have collected, and they would love somebody to come on board to help them write a paper based on using these data. And so this could be an option for that. I myself, I have that often is the case. I have data sets that are sitting there as orphans of science, waiting to be adopted. And so that is another option. Yet another option is to build on what you've already done. So if you have data collected from a previous academic work that you've done, TCC or monography or whatever, or dissertation, and you want to try another angle or maybe a chapter from your master's dissertation that you never really built up as an article, that would be another option. Worst case, and I put worst case in scare quotes, it's not really a bad case. It's just that if you exhaust your other options, you can consider what is called a systematic review, or even better, perhaps for this class, what's called a scoping review. In case you don't know, some of you probably have seen this before, the difference between a systematic review and a scoping review is that whereas the systematic review involves establishing some criteria for exclusion of what articles, what literature you will not include. A scoping review basically is you don't necessarily have any a priori assumptions about what will be included. Instead, you focus on why justifying the review in the first place, showing that there's a gap that needs to be filled in the literature. And so a scoping review can be a good option because you will include, in that case, an introduction, you will include results, you will include a discussion without having primary data collected. So that is another option. It could be a systematic review as well, but I think a scoping review might be easier for a class like this. And then some of you, not very many, but a few of you don't even have a topic yet. You have no idea what you're going to do for your dissertation or your thesis. In this case, you should talk to your advisor soon to try to define a topic that would be appropriate for this class. And if your advisor has gone to Hawaii and you don't know where she or he is, then talk to one of us at CUPA. And use what you have. So look at the introduction, the section that you already have in the articles. But what you shouldn't do is not use what you have as a kind of Control C, Control V. You should never do this for an article. You should never just copy your dissertation or your doctoral thesis for an article. Instead, you should try to rewrite that story, thinking of the journal, the specific journals that you're going to be submitting to, thinking of the specific way you want to position yourself in the conversation that you're trying to address. Because what happens is that people, when they try to do this, it looks like this, where if any of you have been to Japan, this actually is really, these people really exist. They call them pushmen. They have to, the cars get so full, they have to have people help them in the rush hour to push them into the cars. And so, you know, metaphorically, you can look at what happens when you try to do a Control C, copy and paste of your existing dissertation and thesis work is you have this massive, you know, lit review, and you trying to stick that, all of that lit review or your, you know, embasamento teórico and all of that into that car, and it gets messy. Your story gets muddled. So try to avoid that situation. Instead, as I mentioned, look at what we've done already in this class. Think about when you structure your introduction. Try to remember to show what you're contributing. Keep that in mind, and you're going to have to dig in very soon. This is your introduction. I know a lot of people here feel like this right now. Like, oh no, I don't know how we'll do this. You will be able to do this. As I said at the beginning of this class, if you don't feel confident about doing this in English, that's okay. Not everybody here has strong English. What's important for me now is that you're able to write an introduction that reflects the main points that I have made throughout this course. So if you write it in Portuguese too, we have people that read Portuguese, and that's fine. We're going to analyze not the English so much. We will give you feedback on your English. We'll take it into account. But if you make mistakes in English, we're not going to take those. We're not going to discount those from your score. We'll take away from your score if you have an introduction that is too long, that is clearly a copy and paste job from your dissertation, or one that doesn't reflect at all the things that we've tried to focus on so far in this course. So linguistically speaking, you can submit it in English, or you can submit it in Portuguese. That's fine with us. We don't have anybody from France here, sorry. If I see somebody in the audience who's from France, sorry, our French is not so great. I wouldn't be able to give you feedback on that. But English and Portuguese, no problem. And so what we're looking at right now is we have done this today, and over the next 2 weeks, you're going to be focusing on your introduction, and you're going to have a lot of opportunities to focus on it and restructure it. And so you have a few weeks from today to already start writing that. And it doesn't have to be very long. We're talking about 500 words or 1,000 words max, really, in a lot of cases. And then finally, it'll be due on the 10th. And this is going to be, I think, in this class, maybe the most important assignment, even though it doesn't receive the most weight. For me, it's one of the most important assignments because this is the assignment for which you will receive the most feedback from us. We'll give you detailed feedback on this assignment because we feel that at this point it's important for you to, if you still are unsure about what you should do in the introduction section or what the main points are that I'm trying to make, if you're not sure about that, this is the place to already intervene and help you. And as I've said many times already in this course, the introduction for me is a key point in the article because it's where the reader can already become frustrated with the reading process if she or he does not know what point you're trying to make. So the introduction, we really do focus on it a lot in the first part of the semester. You'll have some time to do it, and it's an assignment for which you'll receive a lot of detailed feedback. And that's it. That's all I have to say for today. My final message is, keep calm and write on. Yes. So that's it. You have homework.
Yes. So we have homework and pessoal, a lição de casa começa hoje após a aula e vai até
Tuesday next week.
Terça-feira da semana que vem, 23 horas, 59 minutos, 59 segundos, tá bom? A gente tem uma semana. Tá. A gente tem uma semana para fazer a lição de casa, tá? A lição de casa 1, 2 e 3 já foram fechadas, tá bom? Quem não entregou, sorry.
Yeah, and also, sorry. And remember that if you really need any help, someone to talk to about your assignment at this stage, you have this option on our website, and use it, because we're there, happy to. That's not all everybody. That's some of the people there at CAPA who are smiling and waiting for you to talk to, including myself.
Thanks, everyone.